Soulless Dead, Chapter 16. The Settlement. It had been 3 weeks to about a month since I had left Rose Hill, fleeing for my life for fear of incarceration or even death. What lay heavy on my mind was the stress and disorders that I had began to develop after my rather hateful actions against my fellow man. The stress of keeping Rose Hill afloat and keeping everybody alive had begun to eat away at my mind and my psyche. And, of course, it caused me to run away, do very rash things. The first few nights of me living in my little makeshift apartment on the motel in the riverfront in the middle of Wichita was full of quiet nights with me in my armor and my pistol laying close next to me. Nights where I would listen and hope that there was nobody else inside the building with me. Like a scared little rabbit, I didn't poke my head out of the hole until I was sure all the predators were gone. I was scared that somebody would be waiting on the fourth or fifth floor, knowing that I was going to be coming up there with a cigarette in hand and a shotgun in the other, ready to blow my head off after saying a cool line. But I got a little more brazen and a little more brave. I made my way around inside the hotel and found a rich amount of resources that a lot of people would overlook normally. I looked around and I found plenty of water that the hotel would give complimentary to other people. Enough to last me at least 6 months, so that was definitely something that I was very happy about, and gave me a little bit of a pep in my step as to go to my survival. I grabbed some keys from the admin building and went as far to find all kinds of snacks and food still in the snack machines, untouched. Soda and all kinds of candy. I even gorged myself at one point and vomited all over the floor. The smell was atrocious, but of course I'm lazy, so I just grabbed a rug and threw it over it. It didn't really get rid of the smell, but I didn't want to mess with it. Upon searching more, I found coffee and sugar and creamer. I found salt and pepper, and I even found all kinds of resources that a lot of people would jump for joy for finding just in the regular day that they wouldn't have to go to the store to buy. My little room had become packed full of supplies and food, more than which I could carry. But it was my little hoard, and it made me happy, so it was better just to leave it there than to not have it at all. Upon wandering out into the garage, I even found a company car full of gas, and a couple jerry cans full of it as well. The keys were sitting in the visor, and it was a good way to bug out, so I began to move a lot of the water and food into it. The garage door was shut, and it was a manual crank, so it meant if I had to leave, I would just crank it open really quickly. All the resources were there, and I even went as far as to go to some of the corner stores within walking distance and grabbing kiddie pools and buckets and placing them up on the roof. It was a wet summer, so I collected quite a bit of rainwater. I had enough water to drink that was pure, so I used the rainwater mostly for sanitation purposes, keeping my wounds clean, taking showers. Well, not really showers, but sponge baths. But to say the least, it was nice to not have to smell like old socks and dirty feet. I even made a nice little latrine for myself out of a plastic chair that was sitting up there. Every so often while doing my business, I'd sit up with my Bushnell binoculars, scanning the horizon for people that could possibly be a threat. To my surprise, there wasn't a lot of people around. The dead would meander around, but they weren't really a threat. Occasionally I would see a truck or a group of people meandering their way through the cars that were randomly parked in the street, the papers and everything. They would occasionally push something out of the way and idle their way through the streets quietly as possible, so not to warn anybody who was waiting to pounce on them. I didn't dare approach them because I was afraid that Rose Hill had sent some kind of hit squad to kill me, so I kept to myself. I began to wander around and raided a couple quick trips and some Walmarts, but it's to be expected that there's nothing in there. I found some half-eaten chip bags and a couple candy bars, but nothing too important, but it was something to say the least, and some random cleaning supplies just in case. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with them, but it was nice to have something. It gave me tasks. Those menial tasks gave me meaning. Just up the road, I remembered that there was a Gander Mountain, and I made my way there. I found a little knoll just outside of it and camped out there for a few minutes. I scanned the perimeter with my binoculars and saw some cars parked in formation to make sure that there was cover, and I looked around and saw quite a bit of blood, even some bodies of possibly perpetrators or the dead. I looked around and upon closer inspection, I saw bullet holes all over the place. It was to be expected that the cars were completely peppered. The front of the glass was blown out, and the sliding glass doors were completely shot up. The brass casings that were left behind would gleam in the sun, and whatever battle happened there was long gone, so I didn't have to worry about it. But still, I used a couple motion sensors that I got for Christmas when I was a little kid. The kind that if you walked across, they would set off a loud noise. I definitely didn't want to be caught with my pants down, so to speak, someone walking in behind me, so I set those up just to be sure. I meandered my way through the Gander Mountain. It was to be expected of any survivalist telling you that it would be raided completely. Clothes were ripped off the racks, things were thrown on the floor for no reason, and the place was quite frankly a mess. But I did find some good stuff. A couple camper Bunsen burners that I could definitely use to cook my food and boil water, which was a really nice thing. I found some spices, and I looked in the back, and I found some fishing supplies, some hooks, and even a couple bags of stroganoff that were left in a little box that was unmarked. There was quite a bit of supplies that a lot of people overlooked, and I grabbed what I could, even some small first aid kits, and even a sanitizing kit for food, water, and even wounds, which was nice. I eventually made my way towards the back and found what you would usually think when it comes to the gun section, which means absolutely nothing, considering that would be the first place I would go. The racks were ripped down, and a lot of the bullet casings and shells that you would think you would find ready on the racks were empty boxes and broken dreams. I looked around on the floor and I even found some random bullets, hundreds of them just scattered around. It must have been when somebody was in a panic dumping them into a bag or something. Luckily, there was a bullet catalog on the side to help you understand which kind of bullet you were looking for, and I was able to sort them out after a couple hours. I had a few baggies labeled full of 22 shells, shotgun shells, centerfire rifle shells, and all sorts of things like that. It was ammunition that I really didn't need, but I found a couple pistol rounds, so that was a good thing. But it was better to have them than to not have them, so I tucked all the stuff that I had into my rucksack. I eventually meandered my way out of the building and trotted my way back down towards my home. I went back upstairs and I dumped out my bag and all the food that I had. Luckily, I was able to find a few bags of stroganoff and even a pre-packaged piece of smoked salmon that had been dehydrated. For the first time, I was going to be able to cook for myself since I used to do that all the time before all this happened. I chuckled to myself as I looked at my survival pack because I found an old manga book that I had kept. FLC, a classic, one of my favorites. I never thought to look at it, but I set up a Bunsen burner, which took forever to light, but I remembered from an old tip that I'd learned on Man vs. Wild that if you took a corn chip, which I just so happened to have from a nice quick trip, light it on fire, it'll burn really hot and really well. I dropped it in there and it shot up in flames really quickly. As I sucked my finger from the singed part that caught me a little bit, I started to boil a pot of water and mix the stroganoff and whatnot. I reconstituted the fish and cooked that up with the stroganoff a little bit. I chuckled as I read because this was the first bit of home comforts that I had since the start of this. One of my few passions that I had of cooking was completely foreshadowed by all the horrible things that were going on, and I hadn't done it in a long time. As a matter of fact, this was the first sit-down meal I'd had. I lit a little survival candle and said a prayer and began to feast, and it was quite nice. I listened quietly to the breeze, and occasionally I'd hear a gunshot that would make me flinch a little bit. But those memories and those horrible things I started to realize were completely forgotten almost. Had it not been for the random flinches and the winces of past mental injuries that I had sustained, I would have completely forgot that I was accused of horrible things, and that I did horrible things. The responsibility of protecting people and the stress of that had been replaced with just the stress of keeping myself alive, which was nice. My needs were fairly simple, and loneliness just became a state of mind and being. The menial task of keeping myself alive, instead of having to prove myself every day as some kind of crazy, churched-up warlord, was nice because I didn't have to hurt anybody. I just had to keep myself alive, keep myself happy, and keep myself entertained. The nights of freaking out and screaming and having night terrors and having to have the aid of drugs and alcohol to keep myself asleep was replaced with genuine, real dreams. Crazy dreams. Dreams that you would see out of a Tolkien novel. Dreams of me eating lobster bisque with the presidents and whatnot. Dreams of crazy dragons flying around and me getting to ride one. Stuff that you wouldn't really think about in a survival situation at all. It was almost therapeutic. I was able to not only settle a new home, but settle in my mind, my body, and my spirit. I'd do some reading. I would do little tasks and menial things to keep me occupied, and it kept my mind away from the terrors, and the twitching had started to slow down. The fear and the sadness, and even the pain that I had sustained long before this, had begun to simmer. Sure, sometimes I felt sore, but it really wasn't that bad. All my worries were focused on staying alive, keeping myself fed, getting enough water, and staying alert to the most part. The first few nights that I was on my own were filled with, of course, me covered in armor and enough bullets to shoot anybody who dared knock on the door, to me and some jeans that I picked up and a survival shirt that I grabbed from the Gander Mountain. The armor was tucked in a nice little box over in the corner, and I really didn't worry about anything. And to be honest, if somebody walked through the door, I'd sooner rather give them a hug than a slug in the head, which was definitely night and day. It seemed that me being on my own was more therapeutic than it was detrimental. Sure, I was lonely and I was scared sometimes, but it was nice to not have to worry about other people, as selfish as that sounds. I missed my mom and my dad and my family, and I missed my friends. But I sure as heck didn't miss the stress that came with it, and the anger that I had felt long before. The horrible pictures of me hurting people and seeing people hurt were replaced with, am I going to eat today? Is it going to be Snickers or Mountain Dew for my snack? I wonder if people in a survival situation ever get into this. My days of making sure that the walls were secure were replaced of throwing gang lines out into the river to hopefully catch a fish. And when I did, I jumped for joy and excitement. Of course, then collecting myself, remembering that there are dead people that are wandering around ready to eat me. That being said, it was a nice turn of events. And it was great. I began to wander around, and occasionally I'd see tradespeople. People would wander around with trucks and fill up with stuff. Sometimes they would aim guns at me and get ready to kill me, but I would trade them stuff that I had gathered up, just to be sure. Of course, my life wasn't worth a couple Snickers bars and some bottles of water. We'd get to talking, and we'd shoot the breeze and talk about all kinds of crazy stuff. The crazy part is after the war they'd heard about, that I had secretly participated in, something I didn't tell them, they said a lot of the gangs and a lot of the people in this general area had up and left, so the trade route was pretty much dead. It did make it easier for them to raid what was left, but it was tough. They were the first people I talked to, so I tried to get out as much as I could, but I didn't dare tell them where I lived, for fear that they might slit my throat. Just because I was happy, and for the first time in a while, didn't mean that I still didn't have my guard up. I wasn't an idiot. They began telling me how the gangs, for fear of losing large amounts of people senselessly, had started to move out. With them and their hustle and bustle of moving several hundred people, or possibly just about 40 or 50, made a lot of noise, so a lot of the dead would follow them while their trucks would leave in quite a hurry. That would explain why there wasn't a lot of dead where I was living, which I had to thank the gangs of all people. He said the survivors were equally afraid because of a large group fighting that many people. I heard that they'd slaughtered an entire gang that had been stealing people and all sorts of horrible nastiness that I was already aware of. I asked questions as if I didn't know what was going on, just to see how they felt about it. They were happy that the gangs were gone, so they didn't get raided, but they were also scared that that group might lose it and start killing other people too. They also said it was pretty nice not hearing artillery guns going off and planes flying in the air. It made them paranoid. I laughed inside a little bit because I knew that, quite frankly, I was responsible for all that kind of stuff. And they had no idea that some punk teenager, well, I wouldn't say that, but some punk guy was causing all that. Just because I was a little afraid of somebody and because I got upset. We talked for a couple more hours, but as the sun went down, I wandered back out into the bush and made my way back home. We parted ways and they drove off. On the way home, I thought to myself that it was pretty nice. Hardly anybody was left because they were afraid of my people, both gang and normal people. The dead had started to follow the people that made a ruckus leaving, and so there weren't very many. Things were starting to look up a little bit. Things were quiet. Sure, they were lonely, but occasionally I would meet somebody. I'd have my guard up naturally, but it was something cool. For once in my life, I had real purpose. I wasn't depressed about anything. I was just kind of existing. And for the first time in a while, I felt like I was helping someone, even if it was just me. It was just enough, and I was okay with that.